we're going to do a special video today. We're going to deep dive into the evolution of Kellan's portfolio as a real estate investor.
This is the property I call my first crack house. It had tenants in the rear unit that were dealing meth, literally.
Out of Kellan's first 4 properties, 2 of them were the problem property on the street,
Yes.
right?
Yes, exactly. Those are the properties that have some value add, and value add means forced appreciation, which, as you remember, is the important part about buying a BRRRR, forcing appreciation.
Forced appreciation through strategic renovations. Yes. Between March 2019 and today in 2020,
I ended up going on a van trip with Angie. We did
left your job.
Left my left my day job. Like, I hit financial independence quite early, but I wanted to keep building more passive income, because why not? And because I was able to qualify for mortgages. So I think don't quit earlier than you need to. Matt was my mentor from day one, and I wouldn't have been able to do anything that I've done without Matt's help.
What is up, YouTube? In today's video, we catch up with Kellan and discuss how over the course of 2.5 years, he's been able to acquire over 10 properties, dozens of units, and reach financial independence and quit the rat race, all in under 3 years. It's really exciting to be bringing Kellan's full story to you guys. In fact, because we're bringing his full story, this is actually going to be a 2-part video series, but we're going to go line by line, property by property, through his acquisitions that allowed him to build up his real estate portfolio to the point where he could quit his day job as a software developer. Really excited to be diving into Kellan's backstory. If you guys aren't familiar with Kellan, you definitely need to watch this video, because when I met him back in 2016, he was just getting started into real estate investing. In fact, he was really scared. I used to joke about him being a deer in the headlights. He actually walked through one of the properties that I ended up buying and documenting and showing to you guys on my YouTube channel. That was the Burring Elias Street series of videos. Those were in fact the very first videos I ever released on YouTube. So really excited to catch up with Kellan and show you guys exactly how he managed to reach financial independence because of real estate investing. What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here with Kellan, and we're going to do a special video today. We're going to deep dive into the evolution of Kellan's portfolio as a real estate investor. If you guys aren't familiar with Kellan, he's been on the YouTube channel maybe 3 or 4 times now. As well, he's co-host of the On Fire podcast with myself. If you guys want, we'll throw a link in the video description down below. A lot of you are probably saying, Matt, you've got a podcast? Sort of. So yeah, check it out. It's really focused on financial independence, retiring early. And in today's video, we're going to break down exactly how Kellan's portfolio evolved and at what stage she reached financial independence, what stage she left the rat race, and just kind of showing you guys a behind the scenes perspective of how an investor's mindset really evolves. Because let's dive back into our backstory first, Kellan. So we actually met right before you bought your first property.
Yeah. So like Matt always described me as a deer in the headlights, which at the time I was like, yeah, it's true. Like I was just learning and I was just absorbing. So I would go out to, we had Bigger Pockets meetups at the time, and basically a few of us kind of just saw a post on the Bigger Pockets website. Hey, come out. It was the first one, basically the first meetup in London. And I think it was long before any of these meetup groups really existed. So we met up, and Matt McKeever was there, Dylan McLaughlin, shortly after Mike Rosehart came, Jeff Weibo, and it was kind of like where everything sort of spawned off from there. And we were going there, we were all inspired, but we're like, this is only once a month. And every time we'd meet up, it's like, what are you even up to? And a month had passed, and like the amount of things that we'd done in that time was absurd. So we're like, we need to get together more often, right? And like everyone was kind of hanging out more. And then at some point we decided to start Landlord on Fire, and a bunch of projects spawned off from there. So
it's been really interesting to see Kellan's evolution as a real estate investor. So I remember him back, it probably would have been like April or May when we started to really get to know each other a bit better, in 2016. And in fact, Kellan walked through the duplex on Elias Street that I ended up burring. That was actually the very first video I ever released on YouTube. Kellan walked through the property. I think it was listed for like $121,000 at the time for a duplex. 130,000. Okay. And Kellan kind of walked through. He didn't see a lot of potential, shrugged, and just thought, I'll wait for the next deal. I went in there with Jeff Weibo as my realtor. We negotiated. If I remember correctly, we bought for like 110,000. Spent about 10,000 on renovations, then got refinanced for 150,000. So right after that, it seemed like it really lit a fire under you, Kellan, because you'd missed out on that opportunity, and then you bought a duplex kind kind of similar to the one that you
Yep.
missed out on Elias Street.
Yeah, so I sort of learned my lesson there. I wasn't able to buy anything as cheap as Matt had there, but it was a really good learning opportunity in that I realized I was analyzing properties based on their current performance, and I needed to start analyzing them based on their potential. And I was looking on the MLS for properties that met the 1% rule, and they didn't exist at that time either. They were rare, at least. But Matt saw that, hey, if I get the units emptied and I can up the rents, now it'll meet the 1% rule. ARV will be this much, and he kind of talked through how to do a purchase plus improvements and any other sorts of refinancing. And I just studied that video over and over and watched every minute of it and started breaking out my own spreadsheets, and was like, I'm just going to copy Matt, because when you're not in the creative space, you can just copy people, and it's just business, right? It's like, this person's making money, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I started buying multifamily properties in Old East Village and copying the same sort of reno strategies Matt was doing, and it worked, lo and behold. So if you're following someone right now that is inspiring you and how they're doing things, learn how to copy their strategies, especially because people are so easy to access these days. You can just DM them on Instagram, and generally people are pretty happy to just give up all this free information. So definitely take advantage of that right now.
So let's break down that first duplex you bought. What were the details?
So the property was listed for $185,000 at the time, and the rents were $700 and $900 plus all utilities, because they each had their own separate utilities, but only one of the tenants was paying them. And I ended up saying, hey, I'd like to move into one side and rent out the other side and kind of live for free. And it ended up being like this, one of the most stressful deals I've ever done, even though it's one of the simplest I've ever done, only because I didn't understand how the game was played on the financing side. So I was working with a mortgage broker, and like nowadays, since then, I've started to work directly with a bank because I like to build that relationship with a specific lender. But I didn't realize all I needed to get was a letter from one of the tenants saying, hey, look, I'm willing to move out. Kellan's going to be moving in, and that was enough to satisfy the lender to say, look, there's going to be a vacant unit on closing, because the seller was not willing to say there's going to be a vacant unit. So the bank didn't believe I was going to move in. Anyway, it was a whole thing, but I did end up buying the property, moving into one side, and kind of got creative with it. The tenant that was moving out we ended up getting in contact, and she ended up moving into Elias Street, the property that we were just talking about, just down the road.
So what do you figure, like, what's that property look like today? What's it renting out for? Are you still living there? And what do you think fair market value is?
Yeah, so I lived in it for, so I ended up buying it for $177,000. I lived in one half, I rented the other half for maybe $900 plus all utilities or something like that. And that was enough to pay for my mortgage and property taxes, insurance. So I was living for free and got to move on to the next deals. But nowadays, I ended up moving out from that property. Currently, both sides rent for $1,200 plus all heat, hydro, and water. So cash flows quite well. I actually never ended up refinancing that property because I bought it with 5% down. And the goal with a refinance is always to get your capital out. When I was only 5% in anyway, there wasn't really much capital to pull back out. So I was happy to just buy that property and hang on to it as is.
And so fair market value, if you had to peg it today?
It's worth at least $300,000 these days. Yeah, a solid side-by-side duplex that each side pays their own utilities, and it's in the Old East Village. I tend to be fairly conservative with my ARVs these days because the market's just constantly flowing upwards, and I think that I'd rather just go by current market value and be conservative about it. So 300 or so now.
Cool. So in summary, in essence, Kellan's achieved about $100,000 in equity over the last 4 years. It's now a cash flowing duplex that just makes some money every single month.
Yeah.
Do you remember back then, did you know that this was a great deal? Were you scared about this deal? Did you have concerns about actually pulling the trigger and committing?
So when I was looking for this deal, my goal was to buy a property that I could walk to work or bike to work from. And I didn't realize it at the time. I thought that maybe I was being a little too constrictive in terms of what I was the type of property I was trying to buy. But it turns out that criteria is what a lot of renters want. So it turned out really well in that I ended up focusing on a few different neighborhoods in London that met that criteria. And so I remember at the time Matt thinking, this isn't that great of a deal, and it's true, there's a lot of properties that I bought since that refinanced a lot better and that sort of thing. The market has since made it a fantastic deal, of course. Like, everybody is suddenly a genius these days in terms of real estate investing, but it was a good turnkey duplex that I could move into and live for free. And I think that on your first deal, it doesn't have to be a home run. If it can be a first or second base hit and you can live for free or near it or close to it, then I would pull the trigger on something like that.
Nice. Okay, so walk us through then, how did the portfolio evolve after that initial duplex?
Right, so now that I was living for free, I wanted to buy a property that would actually generate income for me every month. So I had no expenses from my living situation. I just had to pay for my car, and I live a very frugal lifestyle, so saving a lot of money from my day job, and I ended up buying a duplex, and this is the property I call my first crack house. So I've talked about it. It was on Horton Street, and at the time in April, they listed it for $155,000. And it had tenants in the rear unit that were dealing meth, literally, and there was a lady that had been in the front unit for over 20 years, and she never went upstairs. There was a sheet that went into the stairwell that she didn't ever go past, and we went upstairs, and there was 2 more bedrooms and a living space that I walked through with like 5 other people, Matt and Jeff and a couple other investors and contractors we know. And one of them was like, what if we change the layout of the stairway? Maybe you could add a bathroom. And then I ended up buying the place and doing exactly that. So I bought it, they listed it for $155,000. I negotiated it with Jeff Weibo, and we ended up getting it for $127,000. And I ended up getting both units vacant as well as part of the offer. So on the closing day, that was beautiful. I walked in, they literally had swept the place, and I had bought a duplex for $127,000. I was ecstatic about it, and I was a little bit worried because it was my first major project, but I ended up putting about $25,000 in, which is nothing considering how much work was done. I was swinging the hammer. I did the demo. I was sweeping, carrying things out, keeping the cost as low as possible, painting, existing trim, all that stuff, just trying to keep the cost down. And so I ended up getting the whole unit done, adding a bathroom, a new roof, everything, and we were in for $25,000. And I tracked every penny of that. I was buying things on Kijiji, like used stuff, and I ended up renting the front unit. It was rented for $600 or $700, and I ended up getting $1,300 plus hydro. And then the rear unit, I ended up getting $875 plus hydro as well. So it ended up refinancing. After being in for about $150,000, it refinanced at $250,000. So that was in 4 months. So this was a time when I ended up refinancing it at $250,000, which meant that I got all my money out plus $43,000. My down payment, renovations, closing costs, and everything, plus another 40 grand. So I now had some serious momentum in terms of continuing to buy further properties. And this was one where I realized it's very important to, when you're burring, to actually burr based on current market values and not rely on market appreciation. You're seeing a lot of people these days that say, I'm burring, but they've owned the property for 1 or 2 years. I don't consider that a burr so much. I mean, it's a version of it, but the goal is for you to get this done in like 6 months or less, be able to get your money back out and move on to the next deal, because we don't know what the market's going to do. So you want to focus on forced appreciation.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is like forced appreciation through strategic renovations. Yes. Now let's take a step back, because there was something you kind of just mentioned there almost as a throwaway comment. But at the start, when you didn't necessarily have a lot of confidence to pull the trigger on these deals, you leaned on your network. Yes. And you just would walk through a property with like a whole crew of people like I used to do back in the day. Yeah. So do you mind just kind of hitting upon, like, what did that actually look like? Why would people want to walk through a property with you? Aren't they going to steal the deal from you?
Yeah, I think for the first 20 seconds of my first meetup, I went in with a scarcity mindset, and I thought, these are my competitors, and I was like, I gotta be careful about what I share, whatever. But at the same time, I knew nothing, and quickly I realized everyone's just here to share and learn from each other. And to this day, the more that I share, the more that I learn. I had a call the other day, and it was like, oh great, I get to teach somebody how to do cash back on closing or something, some creative financing strategy. This is just my opportunity to give more information out and not really get anything in return. But during that phone call, there were a couple of nuggets that I'd never thought about before. So I get value out of these things. The more I give, the more I get in return. And it's kind of been my philosophy since then on my Instagram and all that stuff. I don't really make asks ever, and I think it's the way to go. So I kind of got away from that scarcity mindset and just started absorbing as much knowledge as I could from everyone. I was a total sponge. I think asking good questions was one of the things that helped me stand out, because I would ask a good question, learn from it, and then ask better questions and kind of continue from there, and try not to ask the same questions twice.
Cashflow Tribe.
Hey YouTube, have you checked out Cashflow Tribe yet? It doesn't matter whether you're an experienced, seasoned investor or brand new to the game. I can probably predict if you're currently not having the level of success you want as a real estate investor, it's due to one thing. That one thing is you're not making enough offers. plain and simple. You need to be making more offers as a real estate investor if you want to hit those big, audacious goals that you're setting for yourself. So here's the deal. Cashflow Tribe, that's the community that myself and Ben were making together. And so Ben's actually so busy trying to provide value to you guys that he had to take off there. But here's the deal. Cashflow Tribe is really a one-of-a-kind community focused on results. That's the difference between us and everyone else. We want to get you guys those results. I'm tired of seeing people commenting on my YouTube channel for 2-3 years now, but they're not making offers. What's holding you back? I'm going to guess that it's either a lack of confidence or a lack of competence. And we cover both of those things in Cashflow Tribe. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you guys a 7-day free trial offer. You can join Cashflow Tribe completely free, get it tested out. If you like it, great, stay and pay. If you don't, well, I hope you at least find one great idea that you can take away and use to start making more offers, gain more deals, and finally start making the money related to real estate investing that's probably why you're watching my YouTube channel. So let's do this, guys. Let's make 2020 your year.
Cashflow Tribe.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and that's something I really want to hit home for the audience. Like, Kellan was great at asking a great question, taking the information, and then acting upon it.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge thing for me. Like, none of us want to just talk at someone and not have them go take action upon it, right? Yeah. So like, when I saw Kellan pull the trigger on that duplex, the first duplex he ever bought after missing out on live stream, I was like, okay, like he's serious. Like he's like moving fast now, starting to break things. Like that's great. And that makes whoever like the mentorship or the mentor process, or whoever want to like lean in more to that relationship. Whereas if you're just constantly bombarding them with random questions like, hey, what do I do if the house is a grow op? Well, wait, are we about to buy grow op? Or are you just asking about crazy theoretical?
And this is something we should hit on because we've never even talked about this ourselves, but mentorship is something that Matt and I never considered this to necessarily be. At least we never used that word, but it was absolutely, Matt was my mentor from day one, and I wouldn't have been able to do anything that I've done without Matt's help. And it was just through, taking action on the suggestions that he'd have, and then coming back with more questions. And I was surprised enough to hear that, you were able to just you were willing to keep offering all this help, coming out to the properties. This isn't the kind of thing Matt's going to do these days.
Yeah, so please, but maybe he will. Hit him up.
But yeah, I mean, even myself, it's hard for me to consider, our time becomes more valuable, but there's people out there who will do that for you, and they're happy to see that you're learning and taking action. So learning how to be coachable is something that's really important. Show that you're going to take action on the suggestions they're making. You're not going to ask the same question twice unless it's a particularly difficult thing to learn. And you're not going to ask questions that you can't find the answer to yourself. So I think being coachable was really important. So it made for a good relationship. Although it was mostly a take relationship on my side and a give on yours, I think that hopefully, I made it easier on Matt in that we're able to see results from the people that we're teaching, which helps kind of build us up as well.
Yeah, and that's like the most satisfying part of any mentorship, right? Is really seeing someone grow and develop as an individual. And so one thing I want to put into context for the audience is when you go out to that local networking meetup that's focused on real estate investors, that's the perfect place to find that potential mentor. One, because they're active in your current market, but even more so, what we need to understand is a lot of just normal real estate investors, people that aren't big on social media, they don't have a lot of other people to talk real estate about.
Yeah.
And so that was me at the start, right? When we were hanging out and looking at deals with you and stuff like that, I didn't have a ton of real estate investor friends at that point. So it was your friends and family are usually sick of hearing you talk about real estate. So when you find that kindred spirit, it's so easy to get excited and engaged with that relationship. Yeah. So again, I think it's really important that people at home understand that going out to your local REI or REIA is really going to allow you to find like-minded kindred spirits, and you're going to find a potential mentor in that room.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So then taken massive action. You bought a triplex the same month.
Yeah, so yeah, I bought a duplex and triplex actually on the exact same day. So there was a long close on that duplex because I wanted it vacant. So I was like, let's do a longer close, gives you time to make sure the thing's empty. And then in the meantime, I kept looking for more deals, and I ended up closing on a triplex as well. So this may seem like, where do you get all this money, right? So I started off, I just worked at my day job in the software field. I lived frugally, rented. And this was the first house that I ever owned. So I saved up. I had about $120,000 just saved up. I didn't start with money. Like, you know, my parents, like, one of them has their high school degree, one of them doesn't even have it. And so I did this all myself, paid for my own school, all that stuff.
And for perspective too, because some people are going to hear software and think that, like, oh, he was employee number 2 at Facebook. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you never made 6 figures, right? No. At your day job.
At the time I was making $52,000, and by the end of my career I made as high as $80,000. So, and this is Canadian. So
yeah, and so that's very much within the median family income in Canada.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, having a decent income like that, you know, it does help your debt service ratios, which helps you kind of continue on, which is something we can get into as we build out the portfolio here, because that's a pretty common question. How do you get a bank to approve you for all these? But yeah, so I closed on these 2 properties on the same day. If you think about it, I'd say $120,000. This duplex was $177,000. 5% down was $8,500. Mm-hmm. So now I owned a duplex. I had $8,000 out of pocket. Still at over $100,000 ready to go. Bought a duplex, 20% down on my $127,000. So that was $25,000. I'd still had some money in the bank for this, right? So saving up a good amount of money to begin with is a super important way to get some gunpowder. And then, as you remember, this duplex, I ended up getting all my money out plus $40,000, which gave me more gunpowder for further deals. And I kept continuing that strategy throughout. And as long as you can get your money back out of these deals, or at least most of your money out. For example, this triplex, I didn't end up getting all my money out. I think I had maybe $30,000 into the deal after closing. But that's fine, because I got all of my money plus 40 out of this one, so I was still ahead. And it kind of just helps you build momentum. And I remember, even when I was buying this first duplex, I was coming out of the financial independence mentality, and a lot of us are very frugal, and we're thinking we're counting pennies, right? And at some point you need to stop counting pennies and start counting dollars. And I was like, well, I could do the home buyer's plan. And I was like, should I do this? And Matt was like, you should do it. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want to pull my money out of my RSP because I like to diversify and whatever. And well, the home buyer's plan in Canada lets you take up to $25,000 out of your home buyer's plan in order to buy your first property or something like that. So eventually, and Matt didn't push me on this, but I listened because he threw it out there once or twice, and I was like, I should probably listen. And I ended up pulling $25,000 out of my RSP that I'd been getting from my contributions from my employer. And that helped me. If you remember, this was only $8,500 out of pocket, but I got to pull $25,000 out of my RSP, and I didn't have to use it all for the down payment. So now I had even more gunpowder ready for further deals. So I think using all these different strategies and combining them and trying to stretch your dollars is so important, because early on I was like, well, I could do 20% because I have the money. Well, maybe I could do 5% and kind of keep up momentum even further.
Yeah, I love it. And so my memory's getting a little foggy, but if I remember correctly, those first 3 deals, they were all on-market deals, right?
On and off-market.
Oh, okay,
this is my first off-market deal. Yeah.
Okay. And then the sixplex was another off-market deal, right?
Yep. So I started realizing that a lot of deals on the MLS were a challenge even at that time, and it was hard to meet the 1% rule even after renovations and turnover. So I started looking off-market. And
so what does that mean? Like, where were you looking off-market?
Yeah. So you can do all sorts of different strategies. A lot of people like to throw out flyers and knock on doors. Talk to other investors. I always like to give the tip, don't just talk to other investors, talk to people outside of your real estate investing network, because more than likely if there's a deal, they're just going to buy it themselves, or they're going to talk to their buddy that they see every day and pass it along to them. So it's unlikely that someone's going to pass a deal along to you unless you're top of mind. So Instagram and social media can be a great way of staying top of mind and showing people you're capable of closing. But I think a great way is to just find your off-market deals through non-real estate investors. Matt's given the tip of looking through your pest control guy, people who are in these terrible properties, your junk removal guy, whatever it may be, anyone who's in these properties, offer a finder's fee. Multiple of these properties that I bought, I've paid finder's fees. So say $1,000 or whatever it may be, if someone passes you the phone number of an owner that's willing to close on a property, that's willing to sell their property, you pay them $1,000 for passing along the phone number if you close on the property. And it incentivizes people and it keeps you top of mind. When a deal pops up, they think of you.
Yeah, it's important that you want to share the wealth as an investor. Way too often people are focusing like, oh, but if I don't offer that $1,000 fee, I'm $1,000 ahead.
Yeah.
No, what happens is you're one deal behind.
Yeah.
Because that person's not giving you the next deal if there's someone else out there that's going to pay them $1,000 finder's fee or bird dog fee, whatever you want to call it.
And I think that like the frugality and financial independence mindset early on can hold people back in quite a big way, because they're counting these pennies. They don't want to pay the $1,000 finder's fee or whatever it may be. They're worried about the interest on their mortgage, or I don't know, they're worried about, you know, saving 10% on Tuesdays for their grocery bill because like with their student discount or whatever it is. Meanwhile, they could be spending that time finding more deals. So it's important at some point along the way for you to realize that your time is probably more valuable in terms of earning more money than it is in terms of saving money. So I think there's a big mentality switch that has to happen somewhere along the way.
And so you were living like a pretty lean fire lifestyle at the time. So after getting that sixplex, you kind of hit your fire number.
Yeah, exactly. So somewhere along the way there, somewhere between the sixplex and my duplex there, the student rental, I had hit my FI number. So I had enough passive income just from cash flow, not including mortgage pay down and appreciation, in order to fund my lifestyle. And it wasn't a very expensive one, and to this day it still isn't. If you remember, I was living for free in the duplex and I had income from 3 other properties. It was enough to pay for my very basic lifestyle. So I ended up moving on, I live in this triplex now, but I lived in this duplex for a few years until I moved into this one, and to this day I live in it.
That feels like yesterday looking at that triplex with you. I can remember that now. I couldn't remember what property it was, but now that you said that.
And I have photos. I have photos of Matt walking through this property, pre-beard.
Well, and I think of the duplex too, because I can remember that we shot some video there.
Yes, we did one of the first WIBO limo tours, and we walked through it as an example of, look, this is a simple side-by-side duplex. Here's how to live for free, and it was just a very clean example of how other people can do this. I think a lot of this process is about humanizing and about showing, look, people in your local market, if you're watching in a local market, or real people wherever they are doing this stuff in all markets.
Love it.
So I ended up buying this sixplex, and I'm still working on it to this day, actually. This property I purchased with the intention of holding it long-term and expecting that it's going to be a longer-term BRRRR. So I bought it and I assumed all the tenants, which was a challenge. I had police presence. I had, again, people dealing drugs and doing drugs, and domestic disputes and all sorts of craziness. It was known in the neighborhood as the problem property. It's a giant house that someone along the way converted into 6 units. And yet I was able to get it as a legal non-conforming property. So normally you can't buy sixplexes in this neighborhood, but this property we ended up getting legal.
Yeah, and so just kind of building upon that idea that it was known as the problem property, if you've been paying attention, out of Kellan's first 4 properties, 2 of them were the problem property on the street, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so often as investors, we need to be willing to like think, you know, unemotionally, just very rational and logical. Well, what's the real issue with this property? Is it that the property's actually a magnet for bad things, or is it that there's just a bad tenant in there that's a magnet for bad things?
And like when I was first buying, I would walk around and see these beautiful single families or these duplex. Oh, there's 2 doors on that house. It might be a duplex I could buy. I started realizing I had to switch my mindset to, that house has a bad roof, but it has 2 electrical meters, or look at the grass overgrown, or look at these awful tenants that are throwing garbage all over the lawn. And those are the properties that have some value add, and value add means forced appreciation, which, as you remember, is the important part about buying a BRRRR, forcing appreciation. And generally you're going to get that by buying under market value and by doing strategic renos. And you can't do strategic renos on something that's turnkey. It's harder to. So it's important to find these properties that have deferred maintenance, severe deferred maintenance, and some sort of information asymmetry with the owner as well. And private deals are a really helpful way to find that information asymmetry, because the owners have other reasons why they want to sell, and they may not be up to date on what the current market value is, current rents, all that stuff. So if you see properties, little tip, if you see properties that have severely under-rented prices on the units, there's a good chance that they also don't know what the property is worth. So it's a great way to find off-market deals.
So then we kind of got into the student rental.
Yeah.
And so again, I can remember walking through that one. And for me, the real logic behind the student rental was just the location.
Yes.
It was just such an amazing location, downtown London, Ontario.
Yeah.
At the price point Kellan was looking at, I couldn't figure out how you could lose money.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's deals where we know we're going to make a ton of money, and then there's other deals where we know we can't lose on it.
Yeah.
And to me, it was like a can't lose deal.
Totally, yeah. It sat there for a while too. So they listed it at 275 and, they listed it at 225 and everyone freaked out and booked showings, and then they realized this is listed too high, or too low, so they relisted it for 275 and everyone lost interest. So it sat around for a while, and I was like, Matt and we were at some meetup somewhere or hanging out, and he was like, that property on Mill Street's still sitting there. I was like, is it really? And then I chatted with Jeff Weibo, and we ended up going to see it again and threw in an offer at 250, which was 25,000 under asking on the MLS, and it was a fairly hot market at the time as well, but it was sitting there for some reason, and so we offered 250, and they're like, we'll do 265 or 260, and I was like 250, and they're like 255, I was like 250, and then they sold it for 250 eventually. And which, looking back, of course, is fantastic, because that property is worth probably 400,000 now. And a lot of these, I remember the sixplex as well. When you were like, look, if you turn this over, I can't see how it wouldn't be worth $500,000. I remember you saying that. I was like, whoa, like I could own a property worth $500,000. 148,000. I put in 75,000, and it reappraised. It ended up coming back at 385. So problems and profits. That's just blows my mind. That's the easiest money I've ever made.
If that goes sideways, you're contacting Kellan, not myself. This is something that you can easily solve by having a half-hour conversation with your lawyer.
Just been sitting on my ass, so no. So I didn't buy anything since then, and I ended up going on a van trip with Angie. We did
left your job.
Left my left my day job. So that was a huge thing. I left my day job. My plan was to quit, and I ended up getting laid off.
Well, that's part one of Kellan's backstory. If you guys want to watch part two, check it out right here. Otherwise, if you just want to watch more Kellan in general and see some of the other deals he's done, check out the playlist right here, and we'll see you in the next video. We'll be releasing the part two with Kellan right away.